Hello out there, we're on the air, it's hockey night tonight.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Lighting the Lamp podcast. I'm here with Steve, as always, and we got a lot to talk about, so let's just start. We're going to do a little bit of NHL news, some NHL news segment, and we're going to start out with the hottest topic around the league, which is the NHL's new 4-point inclusion program. This comes on the heels of the Akim Aliu allegations, the Bill Peters firing, and to a certain extent also the Montgomery firing, which we're going to get to. But I'll just quickly run through for those of you who haven't heard. The Board of Governors had a meeting, and they came up with a new 4-point inclusion program, which includes mandatory incident reporting. If there's any incident that gets reported to the GM, coach, anybody on the team, the league has to report it, or the team has to report it to the league. Ostensibly, they'll have some sort of panel or commission set up for something like that. There's going to be punishment, quote-unquote swift and severe punishment for teams that fail to report abuse allegations. A mandatory annual counseling program for NHL/AHL coaches, assistant coaches, and general managers. The formation of a discipline council headed by NHL Executive Vice President Kim Davis, and a hotline so you can call in anonymous tips for reporting incidents. And the language they use is there will be swift and severe punishment for future or past actions. How do you feel about this whole thing?
I mean, it was honestly the only thing the NHL could do in this situation, right? There's gone are the days of the old boys club where things get swept under the rug. The NHL, and I think Gary Bettman is doing the right thing here by really making a step forward and pushing the NHL forward in the area of like player abuse and even just, inclusion in the sport. Whereas, the NHL traditionally has not been the most diverse sport, and not entirely based on the fact that it wasn't designed to be inclusive. It's just the nature of the sport itself. Whereas a league like the NBA or the NFL is just naturally more inclusive because of the nature of the players that it attracts and things like that.
I think it's more accessible.
Well, yeah, that's really what it is.
I think that's the large part of it.
And so they've had their issues, but their issues have been dealt with in a different way, whereas the NHL is now having to figure out a way to deal with this in a responsible manner, as opposed to just letting it go or letting teams design their own policy around it, which now becomes kind of wishy-washy and mishmash if every team's got a different level of policy and different level of punishment, where now the NHL's laid out that no, it's a zero-tolerance policy across the board, so every team is held to the same standard no matter what the incident. And even this, again, says past incidents. So the NHL is taking a zero-tolerance policy across the board for everything, no matter what. Even if, you say it's 10 years ago, the NHL's like, I don't care, we don't want you in our sport, because the NHL has been very good about, the You Can Play initiative and supporting LGBTQ causes and trying to raise diversity in the sport itself. So this is just another step in the NHL. They're already decent track record of trying to, produce inclusion in the sport. This is just the natural progression of making everybody feel safe to want to be a part of the NHL or be a fan of the NHL and want to play hockey.
Now, it's interesting because I kind of went back and forth on my opinion, specifically on the quote that was swift and severe punishment for future or past actions. Obviously, future actions, you're put on notice now. It's not flying. I was back and forth on the whole past action thing because I was like, well, something happened 20 years ago. How much can you really punish him for? But then again, I thought about it and I was like, look, 20 years ago was the year 2000. It's not like it was the year 1865 when we were this country was still figuring out that slavery was bad,
Yeah.
There's no excuse for it, and there's no excuse for any sort of intolerant behavior. So I'm fully on board with everything about this list. I just, my one question really is, I don't know if this is going to really encourage more people to come forward, only because of the nature of the sport. So hockey tends to be very locker room oriented. Everybody tries to keep things in the locker room. They try to solve issues themselves. It's not a very outspoken sport for the most part. We don't have guys taking their team issues on Twitter or Facebook or to the media most of the time. a lot of times it's handled very internally. Guys will either just be traded and we won't find, there might have been stories where guys wanted to get out for years and they got traded and we don't know why, or they try to handle it internally. I mean, I do hope that this encourages people to take more of a stand. I would like to think it will, but, it's just one of those things where it's kind of... And there's a good and a bad with that. There's always that hockey brotherhood, but at the same time, that might encourage some people to kind of keep it on the down low. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, you take the good and the bad with it, but overall, I mean, I like how fast this came out. I mean, this is like literally what? Like a couple of weeks after the Akeem Aliu thing?
Yeah. I mean, the Bill Peters thing was pretty fast, too. It was, like a week, maybe to 10 days that they opened the investigation and he quote-unquote resigned, but was, all ostensibly fired by the league, the team. And then this follows roughly a week to 10 days after that. So, I mean, the NHLs, they've not always been the quickest to respond to everything, but I think this is serious enough for the NHL to warrant a quick response. And I think the league made the right decision. And like you said, I don't disagree with a lot of what's here. I mean, mandatory incident reporting, that breaks up the idea that, like, there is no, like, it breaks up the idea of, like, being able to sweep things under the rug. Because now, even if you tell a trainer has to report through his chain of command, and it has to get back to the NHL. Because if they find out that these things were happening and you didn't report it, the league's going to bring down the hammer. And that's exactly what the swift and severe punishment for future or past actions. That applies to the organization, too. Like, if the organization doesn't report, the NHL will throw the book at them. They'll bring the hammer down. I mean, punishment for teams who fail to report, yeah. Mandatory annual counseling, that's good because that helps in, it just helps to make people aware of issues that they might not have been aware of in the past. There is a level of ignorance to everybody, especially because hockey is a predominantly white sport. Like, let's not beat around the bush. It is a predominantly Caucasian sport. So, and management generally tends to be of, the same, like, the makeup is the same across the board, to management, to players, to everywhere. It's even the fan base. But, like, it helps to make them aware of issues that they might not have been aware of, or things that might be offensive or intolerant to people that they're not really thinking of, because they might just be ignorant to it. It's not like they might be not doing it on purpose, but they might not understand the repercussions of what they're saying or what they've done. So I think that's helpful. The discipline council makes a lot of sense because you need some kind of, like, body to handle all of this, right? Like, it can't go to the Department of Player Safety because it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so having a new discipline council makes more sense. And just someone being dedicated to specifically this issue is helpful because it'll help clear up a lot of issues. Like, it's not like if they handed it to Department of Player Safety, who's handling, like, on a nightly basis, like, suspensions and fines based on hockey plays. This is more like this is directly responsible for this. And then the hotline for anonymous reporting helps because now you don't have to out yourself if you don't want to. If you're in a toxic situation and you want to report it to the league, you can, and you don't have to worry about any kind of internal repercussions from your team or your organization because they see you as a rat or something that you squealed. So I think, the NHL made the right decision. I agree with a lot of these points. I think I'm actually really, like I said, I'm actually kind of proud that the NHL moved very, like, quickly and effectively, and then getting this done. And now let's just see if this has any bite to it is really the issue. It's like, how well is the NHL going to be to follow up, or how well is the NHL going to be to enforce this?
Well, that's the thing. So I forget who said it. It was some current hockey player who said he doesn't really think that the anonymous hotline is really going to be all that helpful, simply because, and he said something along the lines of, like, it's generally going to be pretty easy to find out who talked. And I would hope that if his teammates are in a similar situation where they're being, because this also extends to abuse as well, not just the race thing or, any sexual orientation, race, any of that stuff.
Yeah. This
extends to, physical or mental abuse as well. But I would hope that his teammates would see his side and be like, well, yeah, he was being abused. Like, we're not going to beat up on him for it. Now, here's a question that I would pose to you. The swift and severe punishment, do you think it would be a monetary thing, like fines or sanctions? Or do you think that they're going to go after, like, you're going to be forfeiting hockey ops? Like, you're going to forfeit draft picks and stuff like this out of this?
I guess it depends on what happens, right? Like, if say if an organization finds out an issue and fails to report on it, I think it makes sense to not just find the organization, but to do something detrimental to their hockey ops, right? Like make them forfeit a draft pick. Nothing huge, right? Like maybe a 3rd round pick, but make them forfeit something of value that makes the team more compliant to willing to not want to do that over and over again. Whereas individuals, I imagine it'll come on a monetary scale. And depending on the severity of the issue, I imagine if somebody's does something ridiculous, like if it's like Bill Peters to that extent, or the extent of the Mark Crawford allegations, I imagine it would be the league putting pressure on the team to release them from their contract or force them to resign, because it's not a good look for the league, it's not a good look for the team, and the league, more than anything, the league's worried about maintaining its reputation and its standing in the world of professional sports, which, I mean, I can't blame them. That's first and foremost, the league's trying to make money, and the reputation of the league is
basically tied to how much money you're going to make.
Right, exactly. So, well, I do think there's some genuinely good things. Like, there is a moral obligation here that the league is following up on, and I'm not saying this is all money-based, but there is a monetary aspect to it, where the league's not trying to lose money by being perceived as a bigoted league.
Well, I mean, if you think
or encouraging
about it,
bigots, I should say.
This is not the same, but when a league is perceived as being morally corrupt, I mean, look at the issues that the NFL has had in recent years, and their ratings have gone down significantly.
And football enrollment across the board has decreased because the NFL is perceived as having an issue with felons and criminals and domestic abusers, and the NFL has done absolutely nothing to step in and say anything.
Well, think about it. Michael Vick's going to be, I think he's going to be a captain or a headliner at the Pro Bowl this year. And it's that guy should be nowhere near football for the rest of his life.
Was he an incredibly talented quarterback in his prime? Yeah, but the dogfighting thing really kind of tarnishes your image, and it tarnished the image of the NFL for a long time. I mean, then you have, is it Kareem Hunt?
Kareem Hunt was the guy that I think beat his girlfriend. Yeah. Ray Lewis beat his kid with a stick, and it's actually Ray Lewis was the murderer.
Ray Lewis allegedly murdered somebody, and then. Who was it that got that, played...
It was the guy in the Ravens who hit his kid with a switch.
No, that was Adrian Peterson, I think.
Adrian Peterson,
on the Vikings. He beat his kid with a stick. And then there was the guy... Well, I can't remember his name. He beat up his girlfriend in that elevator. Oh, my God. But, the league...
Hill?
No, the league suspended him. But, they suspended him nothing, really. Because he was suspended for... I mean, to be fair, the Major League Baseball has a similar issue. Not to change the topic, but the NFL and the Major League Baseball have a lot of similar issues. The MLB takes performance-enhancing drugs more seriously than it does instances of domestic violence or anything like that. And I think the NHL has seen that and taken the opposite stand, where the NHL has been very vocal and very swift and severe and had a lot of bite towards all of these issues. I mean, Slava Voinov's banned from the NHL, was suspended from the NHL indefinitely. I mean, he's not suspended now, but he's pretty much blacklisted. Because I imagine the league has leaned on teams and said, don't give him a chance. You
don't want to be that team that gave him that shot.
He tried to kill his girlfriend. That's ridiculous. I mean...
And, this isn't us, beating up on other sports. We're just drawing parallels to say that this is a good thing for the league to have this moment of reckoning and say, we're going to deal with it.
Right, as opposed to Roger Goodell of the NFL looking at it and saying, well, we'll figure it out.
Right.
And then being wildly inconsistent in... This, whereas the NHL has now set a zero tolerance policy, and their aim is to be consistent. This all on paper, this all points to some level of consistency for punishment and rating severity of the crimes. Whereas the NFL has none of this. The NFL didn't do any of this, so now it's all subjective. Whereas the NHL has made it an objective case where there is no tolerance. Period. We are not dealing with any of this. I mean, they said that with the domestic violence years ago. They said we're not dealing with this. They did it with drug and alcohol abuse. They set up the player assistance program. There's a zero tolerance policy for any of this, for anything that's potentially damaging to the NHL and its reputation and its standing in the world of sports. And that's honestly very respectable. I don't agree with a lot of what Gary Bettman does, but I gotta admit, he's good about this. Gary Bettman's good about stepping in and being swift to react to these kinds of things. Would it have been nice if the league was more proactive? Sure, but I don't think in this instance particularly that they could have been as proactive, because if the league doesn't know, then they can't do anything. So the next best step is to be reactive, but reactive in a sense that it also acts proactively. They've solved the issues that they had at hand and have now made it so it is impossible for these issues to surface again in the past. And if they do, you better be willing to start handing out job applications because you're on notice. You know, like the league, you can't say you didn't know because the league made it very clear that they're not standing for any of this.
Yeah, and you know the reason that I asked you about would it be money or would it be picks is because let's say they find an organization, let's say like, $100,000, right? To a team like the Maple Leafs or the Rangers, like that's kind of like petty cash.
Well, yeah, because the ownership there is loaded. Like but like to a team
but
like
a second round pick. A second round pick is a second round pick is a second round pick. Doesn't matter how rich you are.
Which I think is the way the league will probably go about it because it's a level playing field. Like a pick is a pick is a pick, right? Like it doesn't change.
And that's arguably way more valuable to these organizations than money will ever be. Because let's be honest here, that second round pick can turn to a player that makes you way more money than you'll ever forfeit in a fine. Right,
and like you said, like the Rangers can afford to give up $100,000 because their ownership. If you're finding the ownership group itself, I mean they're owned by Cablevision, which is the largest.
Like they don't care about $100,000.
They're like the largest cable provider in the tri-state area. They provide cable to all of Manhattan, all of New York City, all of Long Island, most of the downstate area, honestly. So it's like, okay, sure, $100,000, I make that in 6 seconds. Like I don't care. But a team like the Arizona Coyotes, who might be a little more cash strapped, a small organization, that's a big deal. I mean, it's still probably not a huge deal because the teams are still worth like hundreds of millions of dollars. But I mean, $100,000 still hurts in more way than it would like the New York Rangers, who can throw away money pretty much like nobody's business.
Like water.
Yeah, so I mean the draft pick is the big way, but I think individual fines, like when it comes to individuals and not organizations, monetary fines are the way to hit them because nobody wants to give up money at all, and if you're a coach or a general manager who's being forced to forfeit $10,000 of your own money,
you're going to be pissed off.
You're going to be more willing
to adapt to the rules.
Right, exactly. You're more willing to follow the rules than you would if you were getting, I mean, if they were finding the team.
Right.
Because then you might catch some flack from your superiors.
You might get fired, but
at the end of the day, it's like whatever. Right. I still have my money, but like if you get fined individually, that's $10,000 out of your pocket that you don't get. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see enforced suspensions of some kind. If it's something that warrants it, they would force the organization to suspend the coach. I mean, the league I think holds the right to suspend players and coaches as it sees fit. So if the league says you can't coach, the organization can't say anything because you're not allowed on the league ice. Like
right.
So you wouldn't be allowed in. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see suspensions. I imagine it would go fines, like personnel would be fines, suspensions, and then the last level would be getting relieved of your job. Like they would force the organization to fire you or lean on the organization to fire you because I don't think that the league can't fire you outright or demand they fire you because every team is a privately owned entity. But the league still holds governing power here.
If Gary Bettman tells you to fire somebody, you're probably going to fire that guy.
Yeah, well, because otherwise you better be looking out for some fines because the league's going to start just levying fines at you because the league will probably look at it like, we solved this issue, he's the issue, he needs to be gone, and you don't want to admit it, and you don't want to admit to it, so we're just going to fine you now. So now you're losing money, and the league will probably continue to suspend that player, and it's like that individual. So the league has a lot of leverage here. It really does. There's a lot of, I imagine that there's a lot of bite built into this that the league hasn't really shown. And not to sound like pessimistic, but I imagine the league is looking for an opportunity to flex its muscle on this to really show that it means business.
The first time this comes down, somebody's getting made an example of.
Right. And I mean, whether or not that's the right thing to do, I think the league has every right to do it because the league wants to show that they're not joking. Like, this is serious. So the league is looking, like you said, they're going to look to make an example. That league is going to look to show that they have teeth here, and they're going to look to flex that muscle.
And if you're being a racist, you probably deserve, well, not probably, you 100% deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, like
that sucks, but you 100% deserve what you're getting.
Like you said, it's 2019, not 1819. Like we're not
no room.
There's none. No room. There's no room in it in professional sports or in the world in general. Like that's just there is a zero tolerance policy across the board, morally against bigotry, and I think the NHL is making the right step here by addressing this and saying, listen, we had a problem, but this is how we're going to solve it. And we can't reconcile all of the things that happened in the past. We can apologize, but all we can do now is move forward and try to fix it going forward. And I respect that a lot about the league.
So kind of on this has been connected loosely to the Jim Montgomery firing, not directly. We're gonna get to that, but I do want to hit one more piece of NHL hockey related news, which according to some sources. I don't know how accurate this is, so if this is incorrect.
You're talking about the Jim Montgomery thing, right?
We're going to get to that. But
okay.
Actually, there's one other thing. According to some various sources, I don't know how accurate they are. Apparently, there's ideas to put in place in the KHL that starting, I think, 2 years from now, they're going to shrink the rink sizes to be closer to North American ice. They're going to try to go to, I think it was 200 by 93.
Okay.
And some rinks were going to be 200 by 85 within the next 2 years, which is North American ice. So how do you feel about potentially KHL shrinking their ice rink to be North American?
I think it's really interesting because most European leagues play on the international ice, right? The Swedish Elite League, the Finnish Elite League, they all play on the 200 by 100 foot ice. And the NHL was traditionally the only league in the world that played on the 200 by 85 foot ice, which leads to, in my opinion, a more exciting game because you're closer to the players, there's less room on the ice. The European game is more... And there's nothing wrong with it. It just tends to be more skating and a lot more like passing. And,
not as much hitting.
Right. It's a little more possession based. Whereas the NHL, it's very fast and like you have to make decisions quick. And I think just in terms of like drafting European players and having Europeans come over, specifically Russians in this case because it's the KHL, it'll be more beneficial to their transition to North American hockey, which I think is really interesting that the KHL is willing to make this concession because the KHL has traditionally been very, very stubborn or like possessive about retaining talent and not wanting to lose talent to the NHL. I mean, NHL out clauses are very rare in KHL contracts. Generally, the players that go back to Russia with NHL contracts, it's an NHL loan, and the NHL organization reserves the right to recall the player at any time. And so, generally, once that happens, the teams in the league feel like they have no connection to the players, right? They are not going to be willing to like invest in their development. So I think it's interesting that this is happening at all. So, which, I mean, whereas I think a Swedish league it would make more sense, or a Finnish league, where they're more in tune with losing players to the NHL and they understand that, whereas the KHL wants to try and compete with the NHL in terms of international prestige. And I think that the fact that they're willing to make this concession, because knowing full well they're going to lose players to the NHL no matter what they do, is very interesting. It'll be... A lot of the KHLs are ex-NHLers anyway, or North American pros who have gone there.
Right.
So this transition isn't going to be that big of a deal, considering a lot of them have grown up playing on NHL-sized ice. I think it'll be a really interesting change in the product of the KHL in terms of like the actual games, because the KHL tends to be a lot of high-scoring games. I mean, it's the second best professional league in the world, in quotes. I mean, it probably is, but that's just what they say. Who really knows? It's hard to quantify. Outside of the NHL being the best league in the world, it's hard to quantify number 2, number 3, right?
Right.
Because the Swedish Elite League is considered number 3, but it's like how much better is the talent in Sweden than it is in Russia, and I think just by virtue of a lot of ex-NHLers or ex-North American pros playing in Russia, it elevates its prestige because there's a lot more talent there than there is. They don't traditionally end up in Sweden. Sweden tends to be a more homegrown league, which is whatever. That's kind of besides the point. But I think it'll be really interesting to see the homegrown Russian talent struggling to adjust to North American ice, which is something they didn't think they would have to do. And I wonder how that'll transition into maybe some other guys who have been flying under the radar playing in Russia, some younger guys who haven't gotten a lot of notice, playing well on North American ice, getting a shots with NHL teams, kind of like Artemi Panarin did when he was playing over there. Like, nobody talked about. He went undrafted, and then for some reason just gets signed by the Blackhawks, and he's one of the best players in the league. So I wonder if you're going to see more things like that, because the eye test will be a little less deceiving because the ice won't be as wide now. It'll look more like the North American product.
I think this is, and again, I'm not sure the validity of this report, but if this is true, I think it's great in terms of prospects. I think young guys can now be more excited to maybe, like, because we've heard stories of guys, in the like even Austin Matthews went over to where is it, Switzerland? He went over to Switzerland to play hockey
in his draft year, yeah.
So we've heard stories of guys going overseas to play hockey in their draft years if they want to up their draft stock, and I think this is great for young Russian guys who have dreams of going to the NHL. Because let's be honest here, there's been a stigma around Russian players, A, because of the KHL contract, but also B, because, and this extends to European players in general, where it's like, oh, they're going to take longer to develop because they have to come over here, learn the game, and learn, the ice specifically. And I think this will up their draft stock a little bit when instead of you're looking at, they're going to take one, at least a year to get used to just the ice surface alone, where now you can say, look, they've been playing on, NHL size ice or close to it for their entire career at this point. So maybe this ups their draft stock a little bit. Maybe we see more Russian players getting picked higher because you're not worried about the transition years as much.
I mean, yeah, I think that will probably play a part of it. I think they probably will boost their draft stocks, but I still think the KHL contract clauses are really going to be a detriment to Russian players.
They always will be,
because like I said, like the Swedish players, the Swedish league and the Finnish league understand that they're going to lose players to the NHL. Generally, they come over right away. The KHL generally will sign young players to multi-year contracts to force them to stay in Russia. So now it's like they have a 3-year contract signed before their draft year. Now they have 2 more years following their draft year where they're stuck in Russia. So now you're investing at least 3 years into this guy before he even comes over and gets used to the ice surface and is potentially a contributing member of your team.
Well, I mean, look at what happened with Igor Shesterkin and Ilya Sorokin, signed to multi-year KHL contracts with no out clause. I mean, the Islanders have been waiting for Sorokin for close to 6 years at this point because he keeps getting signed.
The Rangers were something similar with Shesterkin, and Shesterkin finally decided on his own to come to North America.
But hopefully this means that, teams will be willing to wait that extra time for some players because when they come over, they don't have to take that extra step to get used to the ice because they're already there. So that was just a little bit of NHL news. So let's get on to some more NHL news. We're going to start with Jim Montgomery. He was fired, and I quote from the press conference, Jim Nill said, "a material act of unprofessionalism." And he was asked if this was related to the 4-point plan, and he said it did not involve any players, past, present, or any other staff. And one thing that really stood out to me during that press conference was that the entire time Jim Nill and the guy that took over for him, or the guy that took over for Montgomery,
Rick Bowness.
Yeah, the entire time they were talking, it wasn't Jim Montgomery or Mr. Montgomery. It was Monty. They kept referring to him as Monty, and the reason that's interesting to me is because that really makes it seem like to me that this is something that they didn't want to have to do, but they felt like they were forced to do. And allegedly, the story that came out, this was from a Finnish reporter. We don't know how accurate this is. This could be total hearsay, so we're not saying that this is what happened.
But this is just according to, sources.
Allegedly, it involved alcohol abuse and things related to that, which would make sense. I mean, they were really talking about Jim Montgomery as, a friend that they lost. They were like, I didn't want to have to do this to Monty. He was really disappointed, and I was really disappointed. It was hard to do. And, they kept calling him Monty, Monty. If an organization wants to distance themselves from a coach or a person, it's always Mr. Montgomery or,
But usually just by his first name, like Jim. Or they'd be like, well, Jim was, good guy, but didn't work out here.
It was a very weird press conference to me.
Well, the thing that stood out to me was how unwilling Jim Nill was, how unwilling he was to talk about it in general. He just laid it out and said, it's over, he's fired, it has nothing to do with the 4-point plan, it was just something we felt that we had to do, and we're not talking about it. Which, if the thing about the alcohol abuse is true, I respect, because he's respecting his friend's privacy. He has an issue that he has to deal with on his own, and instead of making a media sensation being like, well, he's an alcoholic, and he's this, and he's that,
and they might have known about it,
and he's sloppy, and this and that. It's like, so this might honestly be a quiet way for them to have distanced themselves from him while he gets help. Being like, listen, you're out of the spotlight, you're not the coach of an NHL team right now. Go get the help, go to rehab, go through the NHL assistance program that they have set up for players and staff. And who knows, maybe once he gets help, he could get rehired by the Dallas Stars, because it really seemed like they didn't want to fire him. I mean, he was a good coach. In his first season, they get to the Game 7 of the second round and lose to the Stanley Cup champion. I mean, they win 43 games in his initial season, and in this season,
after a horrible start, by the way.
Yeah, and in this season they had a horrible start, and they've been on fire as of recent. They won 8 straight earlier in late October, early November. They've been really good lately. It's just interesting that it came to this. I don't understand. If he had an alcohol problem, right, which like if it became that serious of a problem that it required them to fire him, I find it really interesting that we hadn't heard anything about it previous to this and that nobody had said anything before this. So I wonder if it's an alcohol problem or if it was a one-time incident that involved heavy drinking and the saying or doing of something that the organization felt that it had to distance itself from, right? Like, he could have said something to someone, he could have done something to someone, and it could have been a one-time thing. Like, Jim Montgomery might have felt remorseful and been sorry about it and been, totally heartbroken about what happened, but the reality is, like, the team felt the need they needed to distance themselves from him.
Especially in the current culture.
Right. And the other interesting thing is that he didn't become available for comment. The team fired him, and nobody has heard from him. Like, he's not taking questions from reporters. The team isn't offering him up to reporters, which they don't really have an obligation to do because he's not on a contract anymore, but originally they might have. He wasn't at the press conference, which generally doesn't happen when you fire a coach, right? But, like, still, even Mike Babcock was available to the media upon his firing. Bill Peters talked to the media after getting fired. So it's like, it's just strange that this goes back to the thing, like, they're keeping it all in-house, but I don't think it's in a way that they're trying to sweep it under the rug. They owned it, they solved the issue, and I think, like, this might be, like, ground zero for the league's new 4-point plan, whereas, like, this might have nothing to do with the 4-point plan, but the zero tolerance policy is in effect, and this is showing why it's in effect, like, how it's in effect,
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. So, if, again, that's speculation based on a Finnish reporter, if this is related to the alcohol abuse or something like that, right? It makes sense that they would relieve him of his duties before he went to get help. Because imagine the media sensation that would be if, Dallas Stars head coach enters rehab.
Right.
As opposed to Jim Montgomery enters rehab.
Yeah, former Stars coach Jim Montgomery enters rehab.
You don't want that media circus around your team. In this way, you can let Rick Bowness be like, look, they said in a press conference they're not going to hire another coach until at least the end of the season.
Which I think is also very interesting because that's not what you usually hear about teams that fire coaches and hire interim coaches. Interim coaches are generally hired to be fired and replaced. Or not fired, but replaced. Which I think is interesting that they're giving him that much space to finish the season, which again would make sense if it wasn't something serious and it was just they want Jim Montgomery to get help. And then they might, I wouldn't be surprised if it really is some sort of issue that he's having in his personal life that they need him to get help for. And once he gets that help, I wouldn't be surprised if the Dallas Stars are willing to talk to him again because it doesn't seem like they parted on all that, like, hostile terms. It seems very amicable. And if I'm Jim Montgomery and I'm having this issue and the team goes, listen, we want to protect you from that media firestorm. We're going to fire you. It's going to look bad, but, like, listen, get the help, and we support you in that, and you getting the help. I'd be willing to come back and talk to them because that shows me that the league, that team cares about my personal well-being. Like, the organization took a personal interest in me, the person, not just me, the hockey coach. Because if he is some sort of alcoholic, right? Not saying he is, but if he is, like they're allegedly saying he is, and the team just let him spiral out of control and hit rock bottom and be an alcoholic and ruin things for him, ruin his life.
Still be on the NHL bench.
Right, and, like, ruin his life. I'd be kind of mad when I come out the other side because it'd be like, you didn't take an interest in me outside of the fact that I'm a hockey coach. Like, you didn't take
care
interest
as long as we were winning games.
Right. So it's like, this shows me that they at least care about who he is as a person. They want Jim Montgomery, the person, to get help, not Jim Montgomery, the NHL coach.
Right. And, look, we can speculate all we want about what happened because, like you said, they're playing this extremely close to the chest. Several reporters asked, and they didn't get an answer. One reporter even said, you realize that this is just going to lead to speculation, and he said, yeah, I know. Like, it's just a reality of the situation. But at the end of the day, something had to have happened, and yeah, I mean, if come next season we're talking about a Jim Montgomery that went through 10 months worth of rehab, came out on the other side, and is coaching again clean, yeah, I'd totally respect the Dallas Stars for doing that, for letting a man get his life back together before he got his job back.
Right. And, I mean, let's not beat on the bush. He's an NHL coach. It's not like he doesn't have money. Like, it's not like they threw him out on his ass, right? Like, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear if the team is still at some level supporting him in this time, like if they're paying for his rehab or they're still giving him the health insurance he needs to seek out the rehab. You know what I mean? Like, because generally NHL organizations tend to be very like I don't want to say classy because that's the wrong word, but they tend to be very supportive in situations like this. At least in recent history,
they're very family oriented.
Because, like, going back to, like, you know, the Calgary Flames knew Theo Fleury had a drinking problem and a cocaine problem, but they didn't want to get him help because they were still winning hockey games with him. So instead of, like, sending him to rehab, they just ignored it and hoped it went away. And then he came to New York, and between coming to New York and leaving Calgary, he kicked his habits. But that followed him. Like, that haunted him. And I think this is a way of, like, preventing something similar, where it's not going to define Jim Montgomery as the coach if he gets the help, because what will define Jim Montgomery is that he came out the other side and is better for it, not that he had this problem or has this problem. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and to your credit, or to your point, the NHL is very good about helping people with personal problems or being very sensitive to it. I mean, think about how many different players have we seen miss several games this year for childbirths or for parental deaths that we saw. Even a team like the Ottawa Senators hasn't bought out Bobby Ryan, but they let him go to the assistance abuse program. So clearly the teams aren't just willing, like, you know, they're not these evil, like, oh, you're not on the ice, we don't want you anywhere near here.
To make it a comparison, it's not like the NFL, where the NFL just cuts these guys and doesn't care, you know, or the MLB to that extent, like, they'll cut guys, like, oh, you have a gone,
right,
done, banished to the AAA, never to see it again, you know? Whereas I feel like the NHL, and again, this isn't us just bashing on these other sports, it's just a reality of the difference in culture between the sports, because, not for nothing, the NHL is the smallest of the 4 professional sports played in North America. It is the smallest by per capita, it is the smallest by, like, you know, attendance. The NFL draws in hundreds of millions of spectators a year, you know? So, yeah, they're a little different. It is a corporate empire. These teams are turning out hundreds of millions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars a season for the NFL. So, which you think would make the NFL more willing to want to protect its reputation, but at the end of the day, they don't care because they're still making hundreds of billions of dollars.
So, right. So they know people will be there anyway.
So the teams tend to be more corporate in nature. It's not like these family organizations, whereas the NHL is small, and generally organizations tend to, like, invest in if
we help our own.
Yeah, they generally tend to invest in the individual and not just the player. You can be, like, if you're great on the ice but you're having issues off the ice, the team will generally try to, like, help you. I mean, Capo Caco comes to New York, right? And this is just an example I have off the top of my head. He's struggling. He's having a hard time, like, communicating. He's having a hard time adjusting to life in New York, which, I mean, Americans have a hard time moving to New York and adjusting, because it's a whole different world. I mean, the world of Manhattan is like nowhere else in the United States. It just isn't, and that's the reality of it, you know? So for him to come here at 18, he's younger than both of us, like, I don't think I can move to New York right now and do it on my own.
No.
And for all his, like, I'm almost 23 years old. Like, I don't think I could do it.
And you've been living here, and you speak the language.
Right. Like, I'm an American. I'm a naturalized American citizen. I've lived here all 23 years.
We've lived an hour from the city our whole life, and we still couldn't do it.
Right. Exactly. So imagine now this Finnish kid who's 18, doesn't speak any English, has to come here and play hockey while also learning about his new home and culture and trying to adjust. So the Rangers, instead of just throwing him away and being like, whatever, and not investing, the Rangers hired Tuomo Ruutu, former NHL player who's working as a scout, to come over and spend some time with him. He spent 7 days with him to help him adjust to New York, help him learn, you know, how to get the routine of, like, being a professional. And then also Brendan Smith has helped take him under his wing to really try to get him to, like, adjust, which is good to see. That's, like, a good veteran move. That's what you see anyway. But back to the way the organization handled it. And they realized it also helped to have someone he could talk to in his native language and not struggle. Because if he's struggling to communicate, it gets frustrating, it gets demoralizing, and eventually it just makes you want to go home. Because if you can't talk to anybody, it gets very, very lonely. And if you're trying to talk through an interpreter the entire time, it gets even more lonely, because that interpreter isn't with you 24 hours a day.
Right.
So for them to invest in bringing Tuomo Ruutu here to spend time with him and stay in contact with him, like he checks in with him regularly to make sure he's okay, shows that the Rangers as an organization were invested in Capo Caco the person, not Capo Caco the player. You know, and at the end of the day, when someone's happy off the ice, generally it leads to more productive play on the ice. which again, it is the end result. They're trying to win games as an organization, and that's not. But that's not to say like they're evil, but like that is what it is. They're trying to win games, and they think he can do that. They need him to do that, but they also want him to be comfortable here with the organization, and they don't want him to go home. They want him to feel at home here.
Right.
So I think that was that was just a story that stuck out because I remember hearing about it on Twitter, and I thought it was really interesting. So it's like the NHL tends to invest in the individual, not just the athlete. Like the athlete and the person, I think, can exist separately, right? There's like Artemi Panarin, the person, and then there's Artemi Panarin, the athlete.
Right.
The athlete is the guy you see every night on the ice in the spotlight, and Artemi Panarin, the individual, is who exists 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The guy that has to still go to the supermarket and things like that. So the NHL teams tend to invest in that over just the athlete, whereas at the NFL or the MLB tend to just invest in the athlete, not the person.
So
sorry about that rant.
No,
that's
no,
a little
no.
like.
That's what we're here for. I mean, that's the discussions that we have to have, especially as a sport. These are the discussions that we have to have. So if Jim Montgomery is dealing with some sort of struggle, addiction, something like that, we wish him the best of luck. If he comes out on the other side clean, I'm sure we'll see him back in the sport.
I mean, he's a good coach. I hope to see him coaching behind an NHL bench again. I just hope he gets the help he needs. That's really it.
But speaking of another NHL coach, we lost another NHL coach today. Peter DeBoer has been fired by the San Jose Sharks after 4+ seasons with them. And this was really interesting to me. This stuck out to me. Roy Sommer, Mike Rickey, and Evgeny Nabokov were brought onto the team to be... Sommer and Rickey are assistant coaches. Evgeny Nabokov is the goalie coach. Steve Spott, Dave Bart, and Johan Hedberg were all relieved of their duties. They cleaned house. The only coach that stayed was the video coach, plus some of the other minor, defensive coaches and stuff like that. But 2 assistants and the goalie coach, plus your head coach, gone. New blood in the organization.
I mean, generally that's pretty standard. You usually see that in the off season though, when they clean house like this. This generally doesn't happen in the middle of the season. You don't fire one. You usually just fire one and bring them in. But I think what this is signaling from the San Jose Sharks is that they want a whole new regime. They want a whole new perspective on this team. They're not just looking for a change, a quick fix. They want to change the whole philosophy behind this team. Because let's be honest, Pete DeBoer brought in Steve Spott and Dave Barr and Johan Hedberg to be part of his coaching staff. So chances are they share a lot of his philosophy. So even if you bring in a new coach, you're now working against the grain. I think this gives whoever joins as the actual head coach, after they replace Pete DeBoer, whether it be this season or at the end of the season, a real chance at molding the team into what they want, and not so much picking up the pieces of Pete DeBoer's team and trying to still use pieces of his system to get this team to be competitive.
Which, I mean, listen, the reason Pete DeBoer was purely a hockey reason why he was fired. The team sits at 15, 16-2. They're at 32 points. They're not really playing well. They've been kind of wishy-washy. They started off absolutely horribly, and then they went on a nice little winning streak, and now they're back to being kind of 500. I was listening to the Sportsnet podcast today, and Stewie, Chris Stewart said, or Anthony Stewart, Chris Stewart's still playing in the NHL.
Yeah.
He said that Pete DeBoer got goalied in that, and what he meant by that is that his goalies basically got him fired. Martin Jones can't make a save. Their backup, Aaron Dell, I think is still the backup. He can't make a save to save the team, really, at this point. I don't agree with that. Do you agree that it largely falls on the goaltending, or how do you feel about firing Pete DeBoer for the reason that the team is quote unquote not being competitive? Do you think that's fair to him, or do you think this is a Mike Babcock situation where it's look, you handed me a team that's
No, I think this is fair to him. I think he's been here long enough, right? He's been here 4 years. He had a good relationship with the general manager, with management. They understood what he wanted out of a roster. So I think this is more or less that just the roster got old and it's not competitive, and the amount of smoke and mirrors you want to use, it wasn't going to make this team competitive. And we both had them out of the playoffs in our preseason rankings, or we both had them either making it.
We made the playoffs. I had them in a wild card. I believe you did too, specifically because the Pacific Division is
weak.
Awful.
Right, exactly. But turns out that the teams we thought were going to be bad, specifically the Edmonton Oilers, turned out to be I don't want to say the real deal because I'm still not sold in the Edmonton Oilers. But they turned out to be.
They've hit a rough patch recently.
They've turned out to be more competitive than we thought they would be, and the San Jose Sharks turned out to be significantly less competitive than people thought they were going to be. I mean, you can talk about all you want about their top three defensemen. You can talk all you want about Erik Karlsson, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, and Brent Burns. But when Erik Karlsson's not Erik Karlsson from 2012, he can't skate that way anymore. He had his ankle pretty much reconstructed, so he's a step slower. He's a little older. He's 28 or 29 now. Brent Burns is close to 35, I'm pretty sure. Ed Vlasic is close to 35, if not over 35.
Even Logan Couture, who we think is the quote-unquote young guy on the team,
is 30.
Is 30.
I mean, they bring back Patrick Marleau, who is 40. He's 40. Like, I think Patrick Marleau just turned 40. They bring back Joe Thornton. And they look at it. I mean, they still have some guys, right? They have Tomas Hertl. You have guys like that who are playing well. But it's just like... I wouldn't say he got goalied. Goalied is not the right term. He got aged. Like, this team got old, and it just isn't competitive. They're not fast enough to compete with a lot of teams. And that's an issue when you're trying to catch Connor McDavid 6 times a year, when you're trying to catch guys like Clayton Keller and Phil Kessel 6 times a year, or even the Vancouver
like
Canucks.
Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes.
Right, exactly. Like, these teams are getting younger and faster, and this isn't a knock at Pete DeBoer, really. Like, I still think Pete DeBoer is a decent coach. I don't think he's a great coach. I mean, like, I wouldn't put him in, like, my Jack Adams considerations most years, but, like, he's a decent coach. He knows how to win some hockey games. But this is just a matter of that San Jose reached the end of their competitive window, and now it's time to tear it down and rebuild, whereas the rest of the division's at the end of their rebuilds. Like, they're coming into their quote-unquote competitive windows. Like, Vancouver is looking to be, like, in the next 3 years, looking to be, like, they'll be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender if things all work out, right? Like, if Pettersson and Hughes and Besser all continue their development, and Demko proves to be the real deal like he is this year, like, that's a team that's looking like they're going to be competitive in 3 years. Like, this is just what happens in the NHL, you know? Teams rise and fall, and that's what happens. San Jose had their shot. I mean, they got to the Western Conference Final last year. They couldn't get past the St. Louis Blues. The Blues were just too big and too strong, and San Jose was just too old and too slow, and they couldn't get past them. Jordan Binnington also had ice running through his veins, and Martin Jones is hot and cold, to put it nicely.
Well, okay, yeah, because I was going to say, that's not to excuse the play of Martin Jones, because he has not been good.
No. But he hasn't been good in 2 or 3 years at this point.
But at the same time, when your top 2 defensemen who play close to 28 minutes a night each are Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns, that's just going to happen. You take the good and the bad with those guys. The good is the offense they can produce, but let's be honest here, neither one of them are winning a Norris Trophy. I don't.
Well, they're not winning a Norris Trophy based on their defense, yeah.
Right. They might win it because they put up 80 points, but in their own zone, they're not exactly a Shea Weber or a Ryan McDonough or a Victor Hedman.
I mean, to be honest with you, I think Karlsson is underrated for his play in the defensive zone, because I think he's really worked on that in his career. He's gotten much better. Like, I think he's significantly, like, more competent in his zone than Brent Burns is. I think Brent Burns is a turnover machine.
Yeah.
Whereas Erik Karlsson's smarter about where he makes his plays.
He's leagues better than he was when he entered the NHL.
Right. I mean,
I'll absolutely
when he came to the league
give
as
him that.
18 or 20-year-old, whatever he was, I mean, his whole idea was push the play, skate, skate, skate. Now it's like he picks his spots, you know? And I think that's just he has to now because of that injury, so he's more willing to limit turnovers because he can't skate the way he used to.
Right. But I mean, he's still not what you would consider a lockdown defenseman.
No, he's still not a defensive stalwart by any stretch. Not at all.
When you have a goalie who's average and your top 2 defensemen aren't necessarily elite in their own zone, you're going to give up goals.
I'd argue their goaltending is below average, if anything. I mean,
right.
Martin Jones, I'd argue, is a below average NHL goaltender, and his numbers are proving that. I'm not just saying that to be mean to Martin Jones. Martin Jones' numbers are worse than league average, and the eye test also proves it. Like, he doesn't look good.
Yeah, and what I will say about this firing, if come trade deadline, the San Jose Sharks sell, and they really commit to selling, and we see guys like, I don't know the no trade clause situation on any of these contracts. I'm just gonna throw out names if they have a no trade clause or whatever. If we see guys like Brent Burns' name being thrown around, or Erik Karlsson's name being thrown around, or even Logan Couture's name being thrown around, I'll feel better about this firing than if they keep the team and try to be competitive. Because to me, if they fire Pete DeBoer with the idea that they're still going to be competitive, they're lunatics.
Well, this is like what happened in Vancouver at the end of the Zadine era. They fire Alain Vigneault because they figure that he's the problem. It's not that the team's past its window. And they bring in John Tortorella, which didn't fit. Like, that was not a good fit. And then was Travis Green their immediate replacement? No, it was a Desjardins guy, right? He replaced him. He wasn't great, and then they finally bring in Travis Green. But with the hiring of Travis Green, they tore the whole thing down and started from the ground. And let's be honest, Travis Green's been good for them. He's a good coach. I really like Travis Green. I like his team is playing a very interesting style of hockey. But like, that's not to excuse the fact that like, the general manager drafted well, and they realized that the window was closed. They really did a disservice by trying to keep winning a Stanley Cup with the Sedins, who were too old to be the Sedins from 2006, 2007, or even 2011 when they played for a Stanley Cup. And I think LA did the same thing. And I think
they're still doing the same thing.
And I think San Jose's doing the same thing. They want to get Joe Thornton that Stanley Cup, but it's like, it's not going to happen with this roster. You had your shot. You played for a Stanley Cup. You lost in 6 games.
And then you didn't make it back to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Right, and then you went to a Western Conference Final, and you lost, and I'm pretty sure it was 6 games.
And, okay, so here's the thing. I totally respect the idea of teams letting players decide who they retire with. The fact that the Sedins retired on Vancouver was only fair to them. The fact that Lundqvist is most likely going to retire on the Rangers is only fair to him. So the fact that they want to let Patrick Marleau, Joe Thornton, maybe even Brent Burns, retire as San Jose Sharks, I'm okay with if they don't trade them. But if they go out and try to pretend that they're competitors, that's such a disservice to what Peter DeBoer did, because they're firing him saying you're not a good enough coach. If they fire him and bring in a coach who's really good with young guys, that's fair. Peter DeBoer is a veteran coach for a veteran team. He doesn't fit. We need the young coach for the young team. But if they bring in another bunch of guys to try to win a cup this year, first of all, that's stupid. But second of all, that's such a disservice to what Peter DeBoer did for the team. And you're firing him because he wasn't good enough. That's ridiculous. If you want to let these guys retire on a team, I respect that. You let a career guy retire on a team. But at the end of the day, they need to tear it down. The window's closed. They played one Stanley Cup. They have one Western Conference championship to their name over the last however many years. I mean, the window is closed. It's over. San Jose. You had 4 good years with Pete DeBoer. You won almost 200 games with him.
They had a lot of good years with Todd McClellan before this. They've been arguably competitive since the Joe Thornton trade. Since roughly 2007, they've been in the mix. They had primetime Patrick Marleau, primetime Joe Thornton. Then you start adding pieces like, Evgeny Nabokov in his prime. And then you add a Brett Burns. And then they have a little bit of a down period. And then you bring in Erik Karlsson. You get some other pieces.
Couture comes on a team.
Evander Kane has been a nice fit for them. And it's like, okay, well, now you're competitive again. But, you had this ebb and flow, and it's just time to admit that the jig is up, it's over, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be mocked for admitting when your window is closed and it's time to tear it down. If anything, that's the most respectable thing you can do for these guys.
They're pretty much the Rangers of the West, if you think about it. A team that had close to 10 to 12 super competitive teams that just didn't get there. And the Rangers did the right thing. They admitted it. It was over. They put out the letter, and they're rebuilding. And now look where they are.
We're sitting a couple points out of a wild card. Again, the Rangers are wildly inconsistent this year, but that's they're young, and that's the key. The Rangers are a young team now, whereas 3 years ago the Rangers were old. Our D-core went from being one of the best in the league with Kevin Kline, Strawman, all these guys, to then being one of the worst with an injured Kevin Kline, Strawman walking, Dan Boyle being there, Kevin Shattenkirk, an injured Kevin Shattenkirk at that, and then now it's okay, well, now it's a bunch of young guys, so you expect these mistakes. It wasn't we're just bad. It's these guys are growing into their roles, and that's fine. But San Jose is still icing a team that's old, and they're not. And if, like you said, if they don't want to admit that, and that this is just a letter to Pete DeBoer saying you're not good enough, then honestly, that's some BS, because Pete DeBoer was really good for this team. He turned them around almost overnight. In his first season, he gets into a Stanley Cup final. And then granted, they lose in the first and second round, but then they get to a Western Conference final. They've been competitive. despite a lot of the issues and them getting older.
Well, they shouldn't have been competitive last year, and he dragged that team.
And he made them competitive, exactly. So it's like, I mean, they won 46 games. They won 45 games or better in every season he coached them. They won 46 games 3 out of 4 years, and 1 year 45. They had they finished no lower than 98 points. I mean, granted they were in third in their Pacific Division, but that's because they were chasing teams. 2015, that might have been
LA and Anaheim.
Yeah, that might have been the tail end of the Anaheim LA period where those were still dominant teams, and now they've gotten older, and they're also doing the same thing. Neither of those the California teams for some reason seem like they don't want to admit
that it's over.
Right,
and
that it's
the
dead.
state is going to be awful for hockey for the next 5 years.
I mean, do you remember in 2014, 2015 when like going through that California road trip was like the trip of death? You went through 3 really strong teams. Like, that was hardcore. And it's looking like right now, well, it was if the Devils weren't so like disappointing, but it was looking like that the East Coast trip was going to be something similar, where like you had the Rangers, the Islanders, and the Devils in a couple of years, and you're going to come here, and it was going to be tough to come out with points out of New York or the tri-state area. Coming out of California with points was hard. It was really hard. And honestly, Western Canada was the same way. Western Canada, like going into Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver was tough, and it's looking like it's going to be tough because like. There are no easy wins up there anymore. But California looks like it's turning into 3 easy wins because they don't want to admit that it's over. The Western Canadian teams all admitted that it was over and rebuilt. The New York teams all admitted it was over. Granted, the Islanders got stuck in a rebuild for like 12 years. But that's... I mean, I'm not taking a shot at the Islanders. It's just the truth.
100% true.
Because Mike Milbury screwed the team, and then Garceau had no idea what he was doing, and then Lou Lamoriello managed to make this team competitive overnight, which is incredible. The Rangers admitted it was over. They rebuilt. Even the Devils admitted it was over and rebuilt. San Jose needs to admit that this isn't a coaching issue. This is a roster issue, and the issue with the roster is it's just old.
It can't compete. It can't keep up.
The older you get, the slower you get, and the faster the league gets, the slower those guys look.
And that's not to say you can't win with a quote-unquote slow team. I mean, nobody's going to confuse most of the players on St. Louis for speedsters, but they're not. San Jose is not St. Louis.
No, and St. Louis still played a fast game.
Yeah.
The way the puck moved through the neutral zone was fast. San Jose doesn't look like they can even do that right.
So, message to California hockey, it's over. You guys need to seriously tear it down, suck for the next 5 years, and then in 5 years, that California road trip can be scary again. But for now, it's over.
And yeah, this isn't us being East Coasters either. This is just the reality of the situation.
I mean, look, we had to deal with the LA, San Jose, Anaheim show for years. So the fact that it's over...
I had picked... Okay, again, this isn't us being East Coasters. I had Anaheim winning a Stanley Cup in like 3 of 3 brackets in a row, and they never got anywhere close. So, like, if that tells you anything, it was I really believed in those California teams.
And I really liked a lot of those Anaheim teams specifically, and I love John Gibson, but
they're going to
waste
his
not
best
competitive.
years, yeah.
So, we're going to move on to something a little bit more fun. Not that last discussion wasn't fun, but this is
a little less negative.
This is more, well, maybe not for some of these guys, not negative, but this is more directly on-ice product related as opposed to the firing of the coaches. We're going to talk, we're about 30 games into the season. Let's talk some big free agents, see how they're doing so far. So I went ahead and just picked 10 free agents with either the most money thrown at them or interesting stories behind them. And we're going to put them up here. So let's start with we'll start with the skaters because we're just more skaters. First guy, Artemi Panarin. 15 goals, 22 assists, 37 points in 30 games. My personal grade for him, A+. What do you feel?
100% an A+. He's taken a Rangers team that would have been okay and elevated to being competitive every night because he had a 12-game point streak. He's the game breaker the Rangers have been looking for since Marian Gaborik left. Because like if you watch some of these games, he puts the team on his back. And what I think goes unnoticed about Artemi Panarin is he plays in all 3 zones. He's competitive in all 3 zones of the ice. He doesn't float. He doesn't take nights off. Even on nights he's not good, he still tries. Like, and that's very rare that Artemi Panarin isn't good. He might not put up points, but he's always at least noticeable. Like you're always worried about Artemi Panarin being on the ice. Whereas in other cases, like you had Rick Nash, right, with the Rangers for a long time, who we thought was going to be that guy. And Rick Nash ended up being like, there were nights you just didn't even know he was on the ice.
Invisible sometimes.
Most of the time. And that's not it with Artemi Panarin. He's been, in my opinion, the best free agent signing the Rangers have had since Marian Gaborik almost 10 years ago.
And here's the thing. Even when you put into context the fact that he's making, $11.6 million, plus a no move clause for 7 years, even in the context of that massive contract and the context of the expectations that came with him, he's still passing us with flying colors. I mean, he's on pace for a 40-goal season right now.
He's on pace for a 40-goal season. He's on pace for close to 100 points.
So even with the expectations that were piled on him, the big guy coming to, the world's most famous arena with a hockey team that probably shouldn't be that good this year, he's still blowing all those expectations out of the water.
And I don't think this is one of those things where, like, you've heard the curse, like, guys only play well in the first year of their contract and the last year of their contract because they're looking they got paid and they're looking to get paid. Panarin doesn't seem to be that kind of guy because this is the kind of player he's been since he came into the league. He's always been good. I mean,
even on some like subpar Columbus Blue Jackets teams,
he was always the best player on the ice. And he's proving that, like, he is in the conversation for one of the best players in the league. And I'm not saying this because I'm a hometowner, right? I'm not saying this because I'm a Rangers fan and I love Artemi Panarin. I mean, both of those things are true. I love the New York Rangers. I bleed Ranger blue, and I love Artemi Panarin. I love watching him play. But the reality is, the objective thing is, if somehow this Rangers team makes the playoffs and he puts up like 85 to 90 points, like
a large part of it will be because of him.
He has to be in the discussion for the Hart Trophy the way Taylor Hall was, because he dragged a mediocre team into the playoffs, pretty much kicking and screaming, just because he wanted to win. And I respect that a lot because you can tell he's not checked out on most nights. He wants to win. He's out here and he came to New York to win.
And the scary part is he's only 28.
Right.
And his contract is up when he's 35. So it's not even like he's going to be 36, 37 when his contract comes up.
I'm pretty sure he's like top 10 in point scoring in the league. He's tied for 8th with Jonathan Huberdeau. And to put this into context, the guys he's chasing they all make similar money. Except for Nathan McKinnon, he's chasing McDavid, Draisaitl, McKinnon, Marchand, Pasternak, John Carlson. I said Marchand, I think. John Carlson, Jack Eichel, and then it's Artemi Panarin. He's up there with some of the best players in the league.
Because he is one.
Right.
And he's just flat out, simply put, he's one of the best players.
And he's 1 point ahead of Patrick Kane, who's making similar money. And he's 1 point, and he's 2 points, or 3 points ahead of Austin Matthews, who's making similar money. So the talk of the contract goes by the wayside because he's producing with or outproducing guys who are making similar money, which is important. We'd be talking about that $11 million if Artemi Panarin was sitting at like 6 goals and like 21 points. We'd be like, ugh, well, we signed him to like Connor McDavid money and he's playing like a 60-point player. Like, oh no. But no, he's on pace for like, I mean, I imagine at some point he's going to slow down a little bit. He's going to have like a rough stretch, I'd imagine. It's just the nature of playing an 82-game schedule, unless you're Connor McDavid. But that's different. Connor McDavid's the best player on earth. But like Panarin, I imagine he'll even out. I imagine he's going to get his 85+ points. Like I don't think it's going to be. And even if he doesn't reach 40, he's halfway to 30 already, and he's got 52 more games to score 15 goals. Like,
yeah,
he's going to do it. Unless he has like a monumental breakdown or like blows his knees up, like it's pretty much like he's going to be a 30-goal scorer.
Unless he Kreiders himself and scores 2 goals in the last 30 games of the season.
Oh my God! Don't even talk to me about that. That was so pathetic.
But another big forward signing, Matt Duchene to the Colorado Avalanche. He got a 7-year, $8 million deal. He sits at 7 goals, 13 assists, 20 points in 28 games played. I gave him a B. I was tempted to give him a B-. What do you think about this?
I think a B is fair because like he's making a lot of money. Like $8 million a year is a lot of cash, right?
Especially when you consider the fact that they gave up.
PK.
Again, PK Subban's struggling with the Devils, but they gave up a PK Subban who was playing pretty good for them.
Right.
So maybe it's a system fit kind of issue in New Jersey, but they gave up a really good defenseman specifically to sign this guy.
But like they've been after Matt Duchene for years. Like Matt Duchene, like they tried to trade for him last year at the deadline before he went to Columbus. I mean, like it was no secret in Nashville that like Matt Duchene was their white whale. Like they wanted him bad, like. And it's entirely because they haven't raised or drafted and raised a homegrown game-breaking center. And when one like that's 28 hits the market and he's in his prime, you want to snap that up. Like, he's not a franchise centerman, right? I wouldn't put him in the same category as Austin Matthews or John Tavares or like Jack Eichel. But he's still a high-end number 1 center in the NHL. And those are still hard to come by. I'd put him on the same level as like Mika Zibanejad. High-end, like elite number 1 centers in the NHL who can elevate their play to play like elite levels of hockey, but generally they're going to be about like 65 to 70 point guys, maybe 30 goals. And I think the issue with Duchesne is the expectations were really high. They were really high coming to Nashville. To be fair, the Nashville expectations were really high. I mean, and the whole team's kind of struggling. The whole team's kind of this weird, like, enigma because, like, they're scoring 4 goals a game, but they're giving up, like, 3.5.
They kind of lost their hard-hitting defensive mentality.
Like, Rene hasn't looked great, and to be honest, neither has,
you say Saros?
Yeah, Saros. I mean, they've put together stretches, but, like, on the whole, they've looked kind of awkward. Like, they haven't looked like that.
They're behind the Wild, if that tells you anything.
And the Minnesota Wild are not good. Like, sorry, Wild fans, but you're not good.
I gave him a B specifically just because, yeah, there's been a lot of expectations around him. I mean, this is a guy that they've wanted for close to 3 years now. And so, unfortunately for Duchesne, when you get delayed what you want for that long, those expectations build and build and build and build.
The analogy is like chasing a girl for that long, right? Like, imagine you chasing this girl for years and years and years, and then you go on a date with her, and you're like, wow, this conversation's not as interesting as I thought it was going to be. You still like her, it's still fun, you're still going to date her, but you're like,
this is not what
this wasn't what I signed up for originally. And that's kind of, I think, where they are with Matt Duchesne. And I don't think that's any fault of his own. Like, I think, honestly, like, he's pretty much the player that, like, he's been his whole career, you know?
I never really even considered him, like, I would never really consider Matt Duchesne an elite center. I considered him a very, very good top-line, first-line center, but he's never really been, when he's had to be the guy, he's never really done it that well. I mean, when he was supposed to be the guy in Ottawa, I mean, granted, the team was garbage.
I mean, he did all right for himself.
But even he looked kind of uncomfortable. I think he's a perfect center for a team that has, like, an elite first-line winger where, like, he's the focal point. Because if you take the spotlight off Matt Duchesne, if we're talking about, you know, say, for example, Matt Duchesne was playing with a guy like Artemi Panarin, right? Panarin has his 37 points and Duchesne has 20 points. You're like, yeah, you know what? That's fine. It's perfectly fine. Or think about, like, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins can put up 60 points this year, but because he's playing behind McDavid, you're like, perfect. That's all I need out of you. But right now, with the way Ryan Johansson's been kind of
Well, Ryan Johansson's been interesting because he had that one really big year in Columbus where he scored the 30 goals and, like, I think it was like the 65, 70 points. And he's never been that guy again. Like, he's come to... I'm pretty sure... I don't think he scored more than 60 points after in any other season in his career after that. So it's like... Ryan Johansson was the original solution to the problem. Big, hard-hitting center. Was going to be, you know, the guy. And then he just wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, because he's not, the focal point gets put on Matt Duchesne more.
Right.
Which is why I gave him a less of a good grade as opposed to, like... You know, if this was, like, again, if we were grading Nugent Hopkins putting up 60 points, I'd give him an A for that. It was a great season.
100%.
But because he's the focal point is Matt Duchesne, the expectations are a little bit higher. And like you said, the team is struggling. The team does not look good.
Yeah.
For a team that was supposed to be competitive and probably try to win the Central Division, they have not been good.
So, yeah. And just for I guess... like continuity, he's only broken 60 points
This is Johansson.
Johansson 4 times in his career, and that's it. Other than that, he's been like kind of like wishy-washy, but like he strung together a 63 point and a 71 point season, and then in Nashville he had 34 points in 42 games, which was the season they went to the Stanley Cup final, and he I think it was his back or his knees or whatever got hurt. Then he had 61 points, 54, 64, and he's 18 in 29 games. So like he's been good. But he's a perfect, like you said, he's a good number 2 center. Like, we're not talking about Ryan Johansson right now because he's putting up numbers that like you'd expect out of a guy playing behind somebody that's like elite. But Matt Duchesne's putting up similar numbers. He's only got 2 more points.
And he's supposed to be the guy.
Right. And that's the issue where it's like, okay, well now we have pretty much we have like a 1A, 1B situation and neither guy's taking the reins. So in the long run, could it be useful? Yeah, because you have 2 centermen who can put up like points. But at the end of the day, you kind of want that guy you can throw on the ice and be like, you're going to break the game open for us. You want a McDavid, you want a Panarin, you want a guy you can go out there and be like, you're going to score the goal, and you want them on the ice. Whereas I feel like Matt Duchesne, for some reason, again, this kind of goes back to the Taylor Hall thing. He carries the hype of being that guy when he's never really been that guy in his career. Yeah. I mean, he was okay in Ottawa. They got to the Western Conference, the Eastern Conference Final, and lost in Game 7 overtime to the Pittsburgh Penguins, which was one of the biggest flukes I've ever seen in my life. Because then the next season, I don't even think they finished bottom of the league.
You're awful. But yeah, so I mean that's kind of where I'm at with Duchesne. Next up is Tyler Myers. Goes to the Vancouver Canucks, 5 years, $6 million plus a no-move clause. He only has 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. But I gave him an A because he stabilizes that blue line.
Yeah, I think he brings a lot to the table that you can't quantify through statistics.
Through points. Right.
Like, he's never been a point producer in his career, Tyler Myers. But, like you said, he's
big, he's a veteran, he's been there, and a lot of their defense is really young.
But he also adds, like, he's playing, like let's not beat on the bush, he's playing like a number one defenseman out there.
Yeah.
Like, he's gone in and he's taking those matchups and he's taking those big minutes and he's thriving. Like, absolutely thriving in Vancouver.
And if you can take a little bit of the pressure off of a younger guy like a Quinn Hughes, and you can line up and match up against a bigger, because a lot of the centers in the Western Conference are very big, or a lot of the wingers are very big too. So if you can match a guy like Tyler Myers up against a big guy, and maybe let Quinn Hughes deal with more of the speed and skill aspect, I mean, he brings a lot to the table for this team.
Like you said, he's been there. He was on Winnipeg when they went to the Western Conference Final. Like, he's been around guys like, Blake Wheeler and Dustin Byfuglien and guys in his career. Like, so he's been around leaders. So, like, to come into a team that's young, he knows what it takes to win because he's been there. He's never won a Stanley Cup, but he knows what it takes to get to at least being competitive in that aspect.
And I think it's also important he knows how to lose because, let's be honest here, he played for some
Buffalo.
really bad Buffalo teams. And for a team like the Canucks who are young, they're going to experience really high highs and really low lows. It's important to have that veteran guy who's like, look, I've been there, guys. I've been on teams that finish bottom of the league. It's gonna be fine. We're gonna pull out of this.
It's important for him to also, like, just make sure that they just stay the course. Like, don't, like you said, don't follow these lows. Don't, like, when you get blown out, don't go into the locker room like, wow, we're terrible. It's like, no, it's fine. It happens. The great teams lose games big. Like, good teams will get blown out by bad teams. It happens. Like, some nights you're just not there.
I mean, the Bruins lost to the Senators the other night.
Right, exactly.
And nobody's going to argue that those teams are even close in terms of talent.
So it's important, like you said, it's important that he's a veteran where he can just be like, guys, listen, like, it's cool. We're just going to stay the course. We come back to the rink tomorrow, and we're going to play. And, like, that's a factor you can't quantify through statistics. And, like, I agree with giving him, like, an A because I just think he brings a lot of X factors. And, like you said, like, the size and, like, this defensive capability in his own zone. Like, I think that adds a lot to a team that really didn't have a lot of it beforehand. And like you said, it lets them shelter guys like Quinn Hughes. Now, Quinn Hughes doesn't have to go out there against Anze Kopitar every night or Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl. You can throw Tyler Myers out there, and he can skate. Like, he can't skate with Connor McDavid. Like, nobody can skate with Connor McDavid. But, like, he can skate well enough where he can keep up with, like, Anze Kopitar and, like, the Patrick Kanes and, like...
Or the Derek Steppans or the Clayton Kellers.
Right, like, he can keep up with these guys and keep them in check for the most part. Like, he's a good shutdown defenseman. He's essentially what Dan Girardi was for the Rangers, and when the Rangers were highly competitive. And I know I keep making Ranger comparisons, but this is just kind of what I have. I'm sorry.
Well, it's the team you know best.
Right, it's like Dan Girardi did that for the Rangers. Like, he got an All-Star nomination entirely because he was the best one of the best defensive defensemen in the league, if not the best shutdown defenseman in the league. Like, you did not want to come down his side of the ice because he was just going to smother you. And Tyler Myers does a lot of the same things. You come down his side of the ice, he's going to smother you. He's going to bury you in that corner. And it's not necessarily going to, like, put you through the boards, but, like, you're not coming out of that corner with the puck. And if you do, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, and, he's been good for them. And
yeah,
there wasn't a lot of expectation around him, but he's been really good.
I remember the expectation being really low because I remember everyone talking about that contract being like, oh, what are they doing, signing him to this, like, the amount of money they signed him to. And it's like, all right, well, that looks like a steal because he's playing just as good as a lot of number one defensemen in the league who are making like $8 million a year.
And he's only 29.
Yeah,
he's not that old.
I mean, like the PK Subban thing, like he's making less than PK Subban, and PK
Subban half of what PK Subban makes.
And PK Subban was argued to be a number one defenseman, and PK Subban looks like the guy that doesn't know what he's doing, and Tyler Myers looks like a steal. He goes out there and he's like, boom, here I am, baby, we're gonna do this. Like,
Subban might even be on the trade block allegedly, but we'll have to see where that goes.
That'd be really interesting. That'd be the wildest thing I think I've seen in a long time. It's like we traded for him, maybe he doesn't fit, and gone. And his value would be stupid low because he's not playing well.
So we're going to move on to... I picked this guy, not for the money that he got, but because of the story that was surrounding him and a team. Gustav Nyquist goes to the Columbus Blue Jackets. 4 years, $5.5 million. 7 goals, 12 assists, 19 points in 30 games. Even though he has less points and more games played than Duchesne, I gave him a B+, specifically because he was meant to be the guy that... He wasn't ever going to replace Panarin. No. Let's not pretend anybody that they were going to sign outside of maybe Artemi Panarin was going to replace Artemi Panarin.
Right.
But he's come in and he's quietly just, he's on pace to put up about 60 points. which on that Blue Jackets team right now, that, let's be honest here, as good as they've been, they were never really an offensive juggernaut. I mean, Nick Foligno's good, but he's not lighting anybody up.
No. The only real offensive.
Pierre-Luc Dubois is good, but he's still young. He's not exactly going to be a 40-goal scorer just yet. So on a team that needed offense, he's come in and just quietly put up 20 points so far, and I gave him a B+ because, let's be honest here, the expectations around the Blue Jackets are not high, as they shouldn't be. But he's done his job. He's on pace to put up between 25 to 30 goals and 60 points.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect fit. Like you said, the expectations weren't very high. Again, they shouldn't have been. There'd be no reason to have high expectations for him specifically. And I mean, like you said, he's just going about his business. He didn't let any of the story or the hype get to him. He's just all right, well, I'm just gonna go out there and play my game, and he's been effective. He's going to put up roughly 25 goals probably because and then he's essentially the player you thought you were getting in the off season. He's been traditionally a 20 to 25 goal scorer in his career, and he's been traditionally a 50 to 60 point guy, and that's exactly what he is right now. And he's not letting anybody down. He's not disappointing anybody. He's what you see is what you get, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that because, like you said, his expectation wasn't to come in and replace the 87 points that Artemi Panarin put up or the 35 goals.
And I think anybody would pay $5.5 million for 25 goals and 60 points.
Right, because I mean, as dumb as it sounds, it's hard to come by in the NHL. As good as the league is getting and the scoring is going up, it's still hard to find guys that consistently can put up 25 goals.
I mean, Duchesne's on pace to put up maybe a couple more goals and maybe 10 more points, and he's making an extra $2.5 million on what Nyquist is making. And
Nyquist, I mean, granted, Nyquist is older than Duchesne. I think he's 32.
He's 30.
30, yeah. So, I mean, he's a couple years older than Duchesne, so the contract carries him through till he's 34. Duchesne's contract carries him through to when he's 35. So, I mean, that'll be an interesting one, right? Because the production is so similar right now, it'll be interesting to see over the course of the contract if they produce the same amount, if Columbus made out with the better decision by letting Duchesne go and signing Nyquist for less money and getting the same level of production, and then drafting and going that route, because this way you have guys that aren't entry-level contracts or under team control instead of just trying to play this game with Duchesne. I mean, I'm not saying they wouldn't have liked to have kept Duchesne or Artemi Panarin, but this is just showing that they didn't panic and they signed a guy for less money and are getting the same level of production out of somebody that they could have gotten out of Duchesne for significantly more money.
Yeah,
and more term.
And it's he's a perfect kind of quiet blue collar, just do your job kind of player for the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Right, which is a blue collar, do your job kind of team right now because they lost their high end scoring.
Yeah, and it's working out for them, sort of.
I mean, they're not going to make the playoffs, but they're not as bad as everyone thought they were going to be. I mean, the Devils ended up being the worst team in the division. We keep shitting on the Devils, and I'm sorry, but
how can you not with the expectations?
I mean, I think we both had the Blue Jackets finishing last in the division in our playoff previews, and it's and that was it wasn't a shot at the Blue Jackets. It was just
it's just the division was supposed to be so good.
The division's good.
It is the best division in hockey in my opinion, but
the division's really good. The goaltending's kind of a question mark. I mean, Korpisalo has proved us wrong and looked really good as of late, but then we still have the holes in the lineup that we knew we were going to be there. They still have some trouble scoring goals. So it's all right, yeah, this is about what we thought they'd be. And then the Devils come on hang on. No. And
let me show you how to be bad.
And their goaltending has been significantly worse than we thought it was going to be. We still thought it was going to be shaky, but we didn't think it was going to be. We thought Blue Jackets were going to be a little more shakier.
Well, we thought the Devils were at least going to score goals.
Oh boy, were we wrong. So the Blue Jackets it's a blue collar guy for a blue collar team who's making it work for them to stay in playing meaningful competitive hockey games instead of getting blown up on every night like the New Jersey Devils are.
So let's move on before we go back to the Devils because we could talk about them forever. And I would love to talk about them forever, but we've given them enough.
It's just a weird situation, yeah.
They will come up at the trade deadline again, but we're gonna move on to Jake Gardiner, who gets 4 years, $4 million from the Carolina Hurricanes with a modified NTC. I gave him a C-, not because of the points. He's put up 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points in 31 games, but he was supposed to come in and be kind of that top 4, maybe add a little flair to that power play. I think that the off-season surgery or the season surgery that he had has slowed him down a little bit, and right now he seems to be struggling. You mentioned the way that Erik Karlsson adapted to him being slower. He adapted. He said, okay, I'm going to focus on the defense a little bit more. I'm going to pick my spots a little bit more. Jake Gardiner, especially on a team like the Hurricanes, who have shown that they like to generate points out of their defensemen. I mean, just look at what Dougie Hamilton is doing. He was supposed to be kind of like a maybe 20 to 30 point guy, and he just looks really kind of uncomfortable right now. I'm not seeing him.
If it means anything, like they signed him and traded Justin Falk because he was going to replace Justin Falk. Like they had Dougie Hamilton, they had Jacob Slavin, and they're like, all right, we'll add him. He'll round out a power play, And
I gave him a C-, by the way.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty fair. I give him like a C, because it's just like he's not overwhelmingly doing any like. He's doing he's kind of doing what you'd expect, but like in a really underwhelming fashion, and like he's not exactly showing that like he's like, not that he's not worth the money, but that like teams are kind of right to take a flyer on him and like wait on it because of his back injury and like the surgery he had. Because he's not the same player he was in Toronto.
I think he's also a minus player. I think he's like minus.
He's been pretty much a minus player in his career, though. Like, that's not...
So it's tough because, again, the expectations for him weren't through the roof. And my grading of him is largely due to just the eye test. When I watch him, he looks kind of a little bit slower, which I expected, but it looks like he hasn't fully adjusted to that. Like, he still tries to make these, like, Hail Mary passes, and he gets caught out sometimes. And I'm really high on Jake Gardiner. I actually wanted the Islanders to sign him. I really wanted him to be on the team, but I really hope for his sake that he comes back and proves me wrong, but right now he doesn't really look like he knows how to play with this new style.
Yeah, I think it's... Yeah, he just doesn't look comfortable, and I think... I mean, it took Erik Karlsson a little bit of time to adjust, but the difference is Erik Karlsson is an elite defenseman, whereas Jake Gardiner is kind of just an above average, if not average, NHL defenseman who puts up like 35 to 40 points.
Yeah, and especially on a team, like I said, like the Hurricanes clearly aren't shy about generating from the back end.
No, and the Hurricanes also aren't exactly shy about like it's not like they needed him, right? Like San Jose needs Erik Karlsson. The Ottawa Senators needed Erik Karlsson. Jake Gardiner's like a nice thing to have. Like it's like a sport, it's like a weekend driver, right? It's like a sports car. It's like it's nice to have. It'll do its job, and like it'll be efficient. It'll be nice when it does it, but like most of the time it really doesn't do anything, and like you're kind of just like, it's there.
Yeah.
Especially when your daily drivers are Dougie Hamilton and Jacob Slavin, you know. And even then you're driving like high-end foreign imports because like those guys are both monsters, So like,
yeah, so it's been kind of tough for him, but I do hope he bounces back. And the final skater we have on the list here is Joe Pavelski, who goes to the Dallas Stars. 3 years, $7 million on a no-move clause. Currently has 7 goals, 7 assists, 14 points in 32 games. I almost gave him a D.
I was going to say I'd give him a D.
Because I gave him a C, but I almost gave him a D because, yeah, the expectations for him weren't that he's going to be the 40 goal scorer, but it gave him $7 million.
You give him $7 million to be on pace to score like 26 goals. Like,
$7 million, dude. Like, if he was making $4 million, I'm fine with these numbers. $7 million is a lot of money to put 14 points.
We were expecting him to come in and like even out Dallas's lineup and make them not as top heavy. We were expecting him and Corey Perry to a lesser extent to play with Roope Hintz and even out that lineup with the top line where everybody knows is Ben, Sagan, and Radulov. So it was like, all right, well, this is a nice option. It's a nice power play option to have. You can put him out there, stick him in front of the net. And it's like he did look. Yeah, I mean, he went without a goal, and I think like the first like 10 games of the season or something stupid. Like he didn't look good, and then like he just looks out of place. I don't like because what people didn't seem to understand about Joe Pavelski was like he didn't score goals in a fashion that was like he came in and shot the puck. Like he was scoring from in front of the net.
He stood in front of the net and tipped pucks.
Yeah, and it's like Dallas doesn't necessarily play that way. Dallas generates off the rush more than anything because they're a fast team that likes to play that like run and gun, shootout style of hockey. And Joe Pavelski's never been the fastest skater. Joe Pavelski's never been like the best shooter in the league. Like he very rarely scores on his like shots clean. It's always rebounds and tipping pucks in front of the net. And again, that's fine if you want to pay him $4 million to stand in front of the net and be a power play specialist. But you're paying him $7 million to be a power play specialist. That's
and he's not doing it.
That's kind of absurd.
And look,
Dallas has struggled as a whole, but he himself has struggled in particular.
He just he's not getting his stick on the puck as much. He's not generating those tips, and a guy like Anders Lee gets $7 million to basically stand in front of the net. But A, he's also the captain of the team. B, he's younger, and C, he also brings some physicality. He's willing to drop the gloves to protect a teammate. He's willing to get in on a forecheck, and he's willing to take a beating in front of the net. Joe Pavelski, from what I've seen, which isn't a lot of Dallas Stars games, from what I've seen, he's not as effective in front of the net. He's not getting his stick for those deflections, and he's kind of just is he even there sometimes?
To be honest, I forgot he was on the roster, if that tells you anything. I was watching a game, I think it was bonus coverage in the NHL Network, and I was Joe Pavelski with the puck, and I was oh yeah, he did sign here.
And it's for $7 million to a contract that takes him till he's 38, and he has a no move clause.
That's not a question you want to be asking. Oh yeah, he is on this. You don't when someone's making $7 million, you don't want the response to them when they get touch the puck to be oh yeah, they are on this team.
No.
You want it to be oh yeah, Joe Pavelski's out there. Great. It's more, but for me it was oh wow, yeah, that's right, that did happen. He left San Jose. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna modify my grade. I'm gonna give him a D.
Yeah, I'm giving him a D. It's not an F because he's not terrible, but a D. It's because you're significantly underperforming expectations.
So we're gonna move on to the goaltenders. Let's go from bottom of the list up because the top of the list is the biggest guy. But let's go from bottom of the list up. So we'll start with Mike Smith, who the reason I put him and Talbot on this list is they're not the biggest names in the NHL, but I really thought it was interesting that they basically swapped teams.
Yeah.
So Mike Smith, 17 games played. He has 7 wins. 2.88, 903 with 1 shutout. He's gone 3-3, by the way, over his last 3 games, and has either a 900 or less than 900 save percentage in 3 of those 6 games. So he's significantly cooled off since the beginning of the season.
Yeah, well, Mikko Koskinen's kind of taken the reins from him. Mikko Koskinen's kind of become the guy in Edmonton, which again, wouldn't really trust that situation, but that's neither here nor there.
I gave Mike Smith a B+ because honestly, for $2 million a year for a 1-year contract, you're really not expecting a lot out of him. And honestly, for an Edmonton Oilers team, if your goals against average is under 3, you're probably doing your job because you know they're going to score goals.
Yeah, I mean a B's fair. I think a B or B+ is pretty fair. It's just because he's doing what you expect him to do. He's stable. He's pretty much what you get. You know what you're going to get out of him. He's not doing anything crazy. He's splitting time with Mikko Koskinen right now.
And he's only got 1 year on his contract, so if he falls out, you just let him walk.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not really with it, and you just be all right, we'll see you later, Mike. At the end of the season, you're see you later, Smitty. Have fun.
Yeah, so I gave him the B, like I said, because honestly, if he keeps his goals against under 3 and his save percentage above 900, he's giving the Oilers a chance to win the game because, let's be honest, they're going to live and die by their scoring. This team is not going to win a Stanley Cup with a 1-0 game.
No.
They're winning or dying by their goal scoring.
They're either going to blow a team out or they're going to get blown out. That's pretty much how these games are going to go with the Edmonton Oilers.
So on the other side of that coin, we had, I almost said Max Talbot, jeez. Cam Talbot goes to the Calgary Flames, 1 year, $2.75 million. He's played 9 games, he only has 3 wins, he's got a 305 and a 907. I gave him a C because, he's got 3 wins in 9 games. The problem is when he replaces a guy like Mike Smith who had a really good year last year for the Flames. David Riddick is still at that point in his career where I think should be starting 50 to 55 games. I don't think he should really be a 60 to 65 guy just yet. I mean, I know I'm nitpicking 10 games, but it's important 10 games. And you really need a backup like Smith to kind of come in and stabilize things, especially on a younger team like the Flames. And Talbot's been kind of
I think Talbot's kind of suffering from that idea, the Edmonton Oilers, not to sound like that guy, but I think the Edmonton Oilers kind of ruined Cam Talbot, for better or for worse. A C is fair. I mean, he's not doing great, but the Flames team hasn't been good. That's kind of the thing.
Yeah, I gave him some leeway because they started off kind of garbage.
But they've been red hot as of recent. They've won 6 in a row since the Bill Peters firing, and they changed coaches.
I wonder why.
Yeah, so you only play for a guy you hate for so long. So, but I don't think he's played in any of those games. I think it's been David Riddick to win all 6, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's so he's not contributing to the winning streak, but it's the team is showing improvement, so I imagine when he gets back into the net that he will also have better performances as a result. I mean, a 305 isn't great for goals against average, but it's 907. It's kind of pretty much where you'd expect him to be, like the high 2.8, 2.9 kind of goals against average, and like a 900 save percentage. It's pretty much right where you'd expect him to be. But what really bothers me is the fact that like in 9 games he only picked up 3 wins. But again, the team was bad.
Yeah.
Was struggling. So I'm willing to give him some leeway, and I think a C, which is like right about average, is pretty much where it is. He's not doing great. He's not doing well. He's kind of just like He's kind of like in the middle somewhere. You're like, he's not great. He's not terrible, but like could be better.
So up next we have Semyon Varlamov, goes to the New York Islanders, 4 years, $5 million plus a no trade clause. Currently sitting with 17 games played, 10 wins, a 2.26 and a 9.26 with 1 shutout. I gave him an A- because the beginning of the year he started off kind of rough. I mean, his first couple of games with the Islanders were not great. But I think that's a product of the way the team plays, because that happened to Robin Lehner last year. Robin Lehner early on in the season, also not great. Obviously, we know what happened with Robin Lehner down the stretch. And Varlamov has played really well his last couple of starts. I think he's won or gotten into overtime, I think 4 out of his last 5 starts, and he's looked really good doing it. And it took him a little bit, but I'm happy to say that he's done a good job of replacing what Robin Lehner brought to the team last year.
I think, yeah, I mean, like an A. I think an A is fair, or an A-, whatever you wanted to give him. Like, I'd even give him like a flat A at this point, because like Semyon Varlamov had always been a good goaltender. Like he'd always, like when he played in Washington, he proved he could be a number 1 goaltender. Then he goes to Colorado, and the Colorado teams out there aren't good, so he kind of falls by the wayside. He gets replaced by Philip Grubauer. Whatever, that's not his fault that Philip Grubauer is younger, and is a number 1 goaltender. Like that's not his fault he got pushed out. Comes to the Islands though, and is splitting time with Thomas Greiss, and is proving like, yeah, he's still a number 1. He's still got it, and if anything, he's actually exceeding the expectations that people had of him, because they're like, well, he's not going to replace Robin Lehner's numbers, but it's like his numbers are kind of right where Robin Lehner's were. I mean, he's got almost a 9.26 and a 2.26. Like Robin Lehner's save percentage might have been better, and his goals against might have been a little lower, but like,
it's really nitpicking in that.
Right, yeah. It's like these are numbers that are serviceable. These are numbers that'll get you into the playoffs. These are numbers that like Henrik Lundqvist were putting up for a lot of years in his career.
I was going to say, these are numbers where if you're looking at 60 games played and 35 wins, these might be Vezina numbers.
Right, exactly. And if not like winning, they're at least getting you nominated, because like these are good numbers. Like he's giving up less than 2.5 goals a game. Like he's giving his team a chance to win every single night.
Yeah.
And that's more than you can really ask for out of a goaltender. Like he's got a shutout, which again, is nice, but like that's not. But like he's giving them a chance to win every night, and most nights he's part of the reason they win, because the Islanders don't score a lot of goals. The fact that so the fact that he's playing as well as he is a big reason as to why they win some of these games.
You know, had you asked me for his first 5 starts what grade I would have gave him, I probably would have gave him a C. But he's really adjusted well over his last, I'd really say his last 6 to 7 games, he's played really, really well. And even like the 3 or 4 games before that, you started to see he was coming around to the system. And the Islanders are kind of a difficult team to play against sometimes, because we give up a lot of shots, but they're a lot of perimeter shots, so you have to be smart on your angles and stuff like that. So I'm very happy with what he's brought to the team. And here we go.
Here's the big fish.
Sergei Bobrovsky, $7 million. Or $10 million for 7 years plus a no-move clause to the Florida Panthers. Currently sits 24 games played, 11 wins, a 3.19, and an 8.98 with 1 shutout. I gave him an F. And I gave him an F specifically because the expectations were so high. He was arguably the best goaltender in the National Hockey League. He was supposed to give the Florida Panthers an elite starting goaltender, something they haven't really had in a long time.
Since Roberto Luongo, like 15 years ago.
And the expectations for him were so high coming in. And you can't even say the team's playing bad, because they're in 2nd place in the Atlantic right now. And sure, some of his early starts, they left him out to dry. For sure. The team was kind of mediocre at the beginning of the year. But, I mean, it's Bobrovsky. Like, the expectations for him are 2.5 or less and a 9.20 or better. And he's not even close to either one of those.
The thing with Bobrovsky, though, is like he always struggles. He doesn't struggle this mightily in a long time, but like he always has rough like first halves, and for some reason in the second half of the season he's always significantly better. So I'm not willing to like say it's been a bad signing, but like yeah, I think a first half report card that's a big owie. Yeah, that's an F, because like
you wouldn't be putting this one on the fridge.
No, absolutely not. And I think what's even more frustrating is like the fact that Sergei Bobrovsky is Sergei Bobrovsky. Like, you said arguably
two-time Vezina Sergei Bobrovsky.
The only active two-time Vezina Trophy winner in the National Hockey League. Arguably the best goaltender in the National Hockey League. A franchise goaltender. And he was supposed to elevate the Panthers to contending status. And again, the Panthers struggled a little bit to start the season, but they've been better over the last month. But he still looked really uncomfortable for a long time. He's really only started to come around recently. And, I mean, I don't know. Like,
it's just the expectations. If you gave me these numbers and told me, hey, this is Jonathan Bernier, I'd be like, bro, Bernier has 11 wins in 24 games? That's awesome. But you tell me this is Sergei Bobrovsky? I'm like, what is wrong with you?
It's like, he's significantly better than this. Like I said, he's a franchise goaltender. He is, in my opinion, he's still the best goaltender in the National Hockey League. And it's just like, he's not playing like it. So it's...
Especially, and if the Panthers were at the bottom of the division, I'd be like, all right, that team's not good. But they're second in the Atlantic. Granted, the Atlantic's not a very good division right now, but they're second in the Atlantic
The only
division.
team they're chasing in their division is the Boston Bruins, who are the best team in hockey, arguably.
And he's had some good games. Like, he had a really good game the other night against the Lightning. They just couldn't score goals. But, I mean, still, like, you just look at these numbers, and it's not even just the numbers. It's the eye test. You look at the way he plays, and it's just...
He looks uncomfortable.
His angles are off. He's getting beat clean a lot. It's not the Bobrovsky we've come to know.
So you want to know something really interesting that I thought was funny that I saw? I was watching a Blue Jackets game, and I had forgotten. Now that I've forgotten Bobrovsky had left, but like, I wasn't thinking about it. And watching Korpisalo play, I was like, wow, he looks just like Sergei Bobrovsky. Like, whoever the goalie coach is has him playing specifically just like Sergei Bobrovsky. And then watching Bobrovsky play, I was like, wow, he doesn't look like himself. Like, the goalie coach is trying to change too much about his game. He looks smaller. The thing about Sergei Bobrovsky was he was always big in the net, right? Like, he was always down low, wide, hard to beat, and he was fast. He was really hard to beat because his reactions were fast. Now he looks kind of like more upright. His legs are closer together, and it's like, and they're beating him clean because like he just doesn't look as fast with his hands or his feet. And it's like, all right, well, maybe you should get back to that. But it's like, if this is how the goalie coach is going to coach him, they really need to make a change of some kind because he doesn't look comfortable at all.
And maybe this is why we've seen goalies struggle. Maybe they need a goaltending change, or a goalie coach change. But yeah, I'm not gonna place the blame entirely on him, but I'm not giving him anywhere close to a passing grade.
No, absolutely not. Like you said, the expectations were so much higher than this that like even giving him a D would be generous. Like
especially for a contract that runs him until he's 38 with a no move clause.
Yeah, he is specifically failed at almost every level of the expectation that they had of him, and that's really a problem.
Especially on a good team in a division that they could probably be competing in. So, yeah, I mean, that's going to kind of wrap it up unless you have so many last-minute thoughts.
No, I think that's it.
So maybe next week, All-Star voting is open, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about some potential NHL All-Stars.
Maybe we could pick out, like, our All-Star captains and stuff and, like, talk about, like, potential candidates for All-Star teams.
Yeah, we could do some All-Star voting of our own, maybe do some mock All-Star teams. And we're going to continue to monitor the Montgomery situation, see if anything gets revealed about that. Maybe we'll talk about some other teams. Like, I know we've wanted to talk about the Lightning struggling for a little bit. But yeah, we'll kind of just see what comes up. So no real set specific plan except talk about some All-Star stuff next week. And yeah, that's going to do it for this episode. We will see you guys next time.